at that time, boy, anything like that was unheard of. And it just jumped at the opportunity. So, I think it was the day before my 17th birthday, and I was graduating that year. So, I joined, I passed the test. And they said, we're going to send you to the University of Maine, and it's under the Army Specialized Training Reserve Program. Okay. Now, so off I went, and when I got up there to college, I said, well, I wanted liberal arts. And I said, I'm sorry about liberal arts, but this was an engineering school, and you have to take the engineering course. Well, I had to take physics. The course was 2 years in one. It was an accelerated course. And by the time I finished the three semesters of that course, I was dead beat. I was tired because I hadn't had any physics in high school. I was running behind. I learned to do an English composition in no time. I could do math faster. I could do it in my head. All of it trying to save me enough time to study physics, which I didn't get a good grip on in the first place. But while I was there, I got my first experience with people in a way. I was just like any kid coming out of school, and you end up who's going to be the strongest kid or who's going to take over the bunch and all that. Well, we were put into an old fraternity house. It was one of those great big ramblers that you find in houses in Massachusetts and Maine and those places where it's like the attic is as big as the second floor. And there was a stairway up there, a big stairway up to the attic floor. Well, the three guys came out and said, look, we're taking over the whole group. We're going to take you over and you're going to do whatever we say from now on. And up to that time, I'd just been kind of a quiet kid, but I said, nobody is ever going to tell me they're going to take me over. So I said to the kid next to me, the kid from Rhode Island, I said, I'm going to take these three guys. And they were all arranged up on the stairs. I weighed, at that time, about 145 pounds, and I was just long and slim. And one of them was about 6'1" and about 215. The next was 185 pounds. And then the last one was just a little. But he said, I'm with you. And I went up those stairs, and I got my head kicked in and my shoulders kicked, and I tore those three guys down the stairs and gave them off to everybody else. And they ran them into a cold shower, and that was the end of the dictatorship type of thing. But that was my beginning in a way, because I had asserted myself for something I wanted to assert myself, and that was my independence. I didn't need any three guys telling me they were going to dictate my life for me. So I ended up in charge of that group, and there was a big snafu in there. We had a cadre, a sergeant, and a young guy from the Air Force, and a lieutenant. And when Normandy was coming up, the Army just went nuts about all these programs. They pulled all these guys out of college and threw them into the regular Army. Some of them that I knew, that were already in the Army going to college, they were dropped in as riflemen into Normandy. Which is pretty tough stuff. You're going out of college and right in as an infantry. And having seen that type of thing, I ended up with a group. And it started off, someone came to me and said, we can't move all these new people. We got 200 people here, and they were to go to college, and we can't move them all. We've got to go eat lunch, and there's no one in charge except you. And he said, how did I get to be in charge? And I said, well, the last time you were in charge of quarters, which is about one of the lowest details of any. They just say you're in charge of taking care of the quarters, that type of thing. But that was the last bit of authority we had, see? And he said, if you don't act on it, we don't get to eat dinner. Because we were eating dinner over to a girls' dormitory, the Estabrook House. So I said, okay, line them up. I said, how many have we got from last semester? Well, they had 12 guys. That's all we had left out of 200 people. As you turned 18, you had to go in the regular army. And as you flunked out, you could drop from the college. So in this tough course and the changeover, we had lost by Christmas time, we lost close to 200 people. And here was a whole new 200 people. So I made 12 different jobs for everybody, lined it up, kept my mouth shut, never told anybody that I had no authority at all. But we ran the thing for the next 3 or 4 months. And in the middle of it, I tried out something that I wanted to try. I said, let's see if we can pass this along to somebody else. And we had an election. And we got another guy in charge, and he ran. See? And it's not easy to run these things because the kids want to do their own thing. But this meant you had to be in study. You had to study from 7 to 10 at night, lights out at 10, and go to bed. As simple as that. The only time the kids had was Sunday, because we had lab classes up till 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon. Anyway, that was my start. So I just shifted from there. I went to basic training, and of course, in going through basic, I happened to go through with a pretty good bunch of GIs, 30 of whom had volunteered for the paratroops. None of us knew one another at the time, but it was a good group, and we all made it through jump school together. We all graduated. So from basic training, which was 17 weeks, you understand some of these people that were in there had 12 weeks of training, and some had only 8 weeks. It's a very spotty thing if you're. But anyways, ours was infantry training, and I found myself getting through jump school. We had to jump 5 jumps for training jumps, and once you pass that, you got your wings. I think the class we were in was class 150. I remember that.
Are those your original jump wings, right?
Yes, these are my original.
So after 5 jumps, you got those
5
wings.
wins, yeah. And that was there were 2 things you wanted to get at that time, and one was to get those jump wings, and the other was to get a pair of boots. And when I went over to supply, I looked up on the counter. The only 2 pair of boots, I mean the real nice boots made by Cochran Company up in Massachusetts, where it had a beveled heel on it and everything. It had brass buttons, and they're just beautiful boots. I look up there and there's a size 6.5 and a size 11.5. And the supply sergeant pulled up a pair of these other lousy looking combat boots that somebody turned the thing inside out and made what they thought was going to be a nice boot. And it looked awful. But I'm looking at that 11.5. I said, well, Sarge, I'll take that pair of boots. He said, they won't fit you. I said, I'll wear double socks. And I got those. And somewhere, they're back in Massachusetts in the attic. But they were a beautiful pair of boots. And I jumped with them. And when I jumped with them, my feet would slide inside the boot. They're too big for me. But it just goes zoom. But anyway, I had what I wanted. I had the wings and I had the jump boots. And I tell you the truth, I never really wanted anything else. I wasn't looking for medals or anything like that. And when I joined this 101st Airborne, that was in March of '45. And I looked at these guys, and gee, they were tough. They looked better in the daylight, but I saw them at night with shadows and everything, and it would have been like going out in the old West or something, and come across a whole group of outlaws around a campfire, and I wander in my little Eastern suit or something, with a bow tie or something, and say, hi, guys. Yeah, they were tough men. They were, and I was glad to make friends with them. I mean,
plus you made $50 a month, right? Jump pay?
Oh yeah, you got, what they told me at Devon's, they said, look, we've got three choices for you people. You can go in the Air Force if you're not quite physically with it. You go to the Air Force. If you're in good shape, you can either take infantry or field artillery. Field artillery is a canvas, and infantry is a wall. And then the guy laughed. He said, "Well, of course, if you want, you can always volunteer for the paratroops. They give you $50 extra a month." So I turned to the guy next to me, a kid named George Smith. I said, "George, you ever been up?" He said, "Yeah, I fly my own airplane." And he had. And I which was unusual in those days. So I said, "Well, what do you say we sign up?" Well, I went in and he said, "Okay." So I went in and they pulled out the sheet of paper, and it was like signing. They might as well have put crossbones and a little Jolly Roger flag or something on it, because it was like signing a death warrant the way that thing was written, you know. And I really, that said, "Well, okay, in for a pound, and for, you know, whatever." The Army got tangled up a bit with their equipment, and one of them's spare chute shot back in the airplane as I was going to step down. I couldn't step. I dove over it. And, but I would, you have to count. You're counting 1,001, 1,002, 1,003 in the chute shooter. Now, that's something you learn too. When you start to count, like I did, I counted out loud. I couldn't hear it. The wind took it away, and if you lose the count. So you gotta count it mentally in your head. So I'm counting, on this sixth jump, I'm counting 1,000, 1,002, 1,003, 1,004, and I'm already 1 second off the danger point. I've got to go for that emergency chute, and the chute opened. And I looked up to check it, and it had rolled all the way up to the canopy. I looked like a mushroom. Instead of looking like this, the thing just went up. It was out like this. The chute was open, but the lines were just rolled together. And it dawned on me what had happened. I had counted the somersaults I was making. When I went out head first. I made 4 somersaults. This way. And I was winding up the chute. The chute was opening, and I'm winding up the lines all the way up. So it is the world's worst effort to try to get your legs swinging in the air. You think you could straighten something out by starting? You'll have to realize that you're standing here. You got 1 foot down, and you can kick with the other. Now when you're hanging there, you got 2 feet off the ground, and you're trying to get them to move to get some little action. I finally got it going, and the thing broke out. It was like, I called it the whirling dervish. That thing came out. I was spinning like this here, and my head was spinning, and all of a sudden, my knees lifted up into my chest. And I said, "Well, guys, you got to relax here and get those knees down." They wouldn't go down. I came in backwards, and I landed on a perfect landing, my tailbone and the sole of both feet, which were even. But it was probably the only way I could have landed well on that jump. So Providence was with me. But I hit my head with that steel helmet, and if you've seen the Roadrunner and the Coyote, that's exactly how I felt. My head was ringing like that. And the medic ran up and he said, he looked and he said, "Are you okay?" And I'm down there patting the ground like this. And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay, but I'm going to stay here for a little bit." And I did. I waited till the next group of jumpers came over. And you know, it was a wonderful sight to see it. I'm right in the middle of the field, and everybody's coming down, floating down around me. That is a great scene. And I really enjoyed it. Anyway, that was the jumping thing. When I got overseas, it's really tough to break up with buddies when you've known these guys for so long. Well, we got split up. Some of the guys went to the 17th Airborne, some went to the 82nd Airborne, and my best buddy and I and a few more went to down at first. But I got split up at D Company by myself. I didn't have any one of the buddies, and 3 or 4 of the guys that I knew went to G Company, including my best friend. But you're like starting over. I don't think I'd ever really want to do that. I don't think I'd want to. I don't think that's good for the service. I think you're better off when you're together. You know, this band of brothers is an unusual thing there. These guys took all their training together. And they didn't go to jump school. They went to jump school in the middle of their training, in a sense. They just folded it in like just another thing for their training. And that's really what made the band of brothers, in my mind. Individual courage and everything, but what really brought them together was they stayed together so long. And some of the problems that they had, I can see why those problems came around. I think that the problems with the commander in lots of military organizations, as you finish training, you're better than when you started. And what you find out, you feel that you're better than the instructors. I've read that in Marine books as well as in any instructional books that have from military. And I think there's some psychological ethics is right. Well, the band of brothers didn't do that. They ended up with a conflict with their commanding Captain Sobel. Now Sobel comes off kind of second best, but Captain Sobel was quite a person himself. He went through all the training too. He went through it. And so he had certain ways he wanted. It made a conflict that shows up. But I think it would be better if they kept buddies together. I can think of three of us that were together. We just kept together. You already know. You know what the guy's going to do next. You can depend on it. But coming into the heat company at night, boy, I felt lost. And the only thing is that Colonel Sink, the regimental commander, had us all meet up at the crossroads. And he said, I know you're all new, and I welcome you in. We've been looking for the replacements, and just pay attention to the older guys, and you'll get along good. Now, that was a big help, especially when you're young, and you don't know too much. You think you do, you don't really. But anyway, I met Joe Dominguez. He shows up in there somewhere. He was one of the first guys I met. Joe was an infantryman, but he was on detail to the JP the day I met him. He just a cheerful good morning. It was great to hear somebody say good morning. And then I met one young officer, Alan Jones. He was Bill Garnier's platoon. And he said, hey, you knew? And I said, yes, I just got in last night. He said, well, I'll try to get you to my platoon. He said, how old are you? And I said, 18. He said, oh, don't tell anybody that. Tell them you're 19. Well, there's no difference between 18 and 19. And, things like that would always strike me. What makes sense, what doesn't make sense. But anyway, there I was in. And from there you had to make friends, to pay attention. Now, when you get in there, all the older guys are not going to help you. It isn't like, hey, we're really glad to see you. They're afraid sometimes because they already have replacements that's been killed. And they're afraid to make connections. And they're also looking out for themselves a little bit, so they're afraid to have somebody who won't do the job and who'll get them in trouble, screw it up, and it's their life. So you kind of had to take it and play it along by ear and do your job. And as Bob Radar said to me one day, he says, just shut up and keep moving. That summed it up pretty good. Just keep your mouth shut and keep moving. Just do what's asked of you. And so, and along the way, then I met different people. I mean, met Sergeant Hale, because Sergeant Hale and Lieutenant Morris, Morris came in after I did, we were the ones that went up with the fire engine before that episode in that book. And we went up and got the first load of books for ourselves, the champagne. And
So we don't want any of you doing that tonight.
right, that's right. But anyway, as I said, I got in there. Now, when they were writing this book, it was a company book. It was going to be written by a company. And Mike Rainey was a sergeant who was writing the book. Mike was a graduate of South Dakota, North Dakota University. And he really planned to write the book, and he died. And he turned it over to Christensen, picked it up. And Christensen had been the first platoon sergeant I had, so he said, everybody writes something. And I said, well, if I came in to tail end, what am I going to write? I would have went for where I stand. Was I just took places. And I thought, what could I say about this place that could be used as a nice filler? They've got some great war stories. They can drop my little story if they haven't got something in a nice filler, like a newspaper. And I had a newspaper man for the boss one time, and he said that's how they worked it. They put everything up into the first paragraph, and then if you need to expand the story, add to it. Each time, ending it. So if you put 2 paragraphs of stories, put 3 paragraphs of stories. So when it ended up with the book, I just put in those little fillers. The only thing is I had a very good memory. And for the most part, those stories that I put in are in there intact. And that was up to Ambrose to he had sense enough as he got those interviews to leave them. And you're getting, it sounds like the guys in, good gentlemen in there. I just wish that more of them had been able to express themselves and been able to tell their part because it was so interesting. I'll tell you what that band of brothers is like. It's more like those guys were like Texas Rangers, Arizona Rangers. That's what makes them distinctive from others. From other people. And, but anyway, I enjoyed doing it. What I had done was, I used to go over to Roy Rogers, and I'd get those pads, those white pads that we put on the table. I wrote it on napkins. I didn't think of something. I write out the napkin. Well, when it came time, I was going to turn it into Rainey. No Rainey. I was going to turn it into Christensen. He had turned it over to Ambrose. And Bill Garnier said, well, Ambrose has it, and they expect the material. Well, I put it all into a big folder. Not a folder, but an envelope. A big yellow envelope. And shipped it off to Ambrose. Well, Ambrose didn't read my stuff for a year. And when he did, he wrote me back, and he said, you know, I'm sorry that I hadn't read this earlier, but I just reached that part towards the end. But he said, I like what you've written, and I like the way you wrote it. And here and there, when he first started, I proofread some of this. Dick Winters would send it down to me, and I'd proofread. So when anyway, Ambrose would get kind of carried away. There's one story in there about a sergeant that tried on the German uniform, and Bob Mercer, and he had a monocle. He really did this, but I wrote that story. So, but monocle, the fleet came across a room full of monocles. Man, everybody had 15, 20 monocles. One-eyed glasses. Well, you're all walking around with monocles looking at each other. It was fun. Well, Mercer put on a German uniform, and he put one of those monocles in his eyes, and he had a flat haircut, and he looked a real German officer. Perfect. And they marched him into, someone got an idea, we marched him into Captain Spears' office. Now, Captain Spears was a tough man. And Captain Spears was had a thing that he'd shot some sergeant for disobedience along the road. A different incident than what was given in the book. And he marched poor Bob in there. And when Ambrose saw it, I put it down. Well, it's me, Sergeant Mercer, police captain, you know, like that. He puts please, 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 and he put it in the draft, you know. Well, he got carried away. You know, he was making that story, but the thing was, the story was effective because it struck his mind. And that's what that was good storytelling. I don't mind saying that. I've been writing for years with the government, making job evaluations, writing writing. So I knew how to shape the thing up. But anyway, I was glad to see that he hadn't really touched the story much. He just put it in. And when you look in, for me in that thing, you'll see Matt O'Keefe in this place, in this place, in this place. See? And that isn't a bad way of writing a book. If there's an input to one of these books, because they can pitch in. And my problem was I hadn't been there long enough to really tell that whole story about that man and others. But I didn't want to have been there. Ambrose was able to do it because he's got a personality that can kind of put himself in there. He was Dick Winters when he wrote that, but he was Dwight D. Eisenhower when he wrote Eisenhower's story, and he was Richard Nixon when he wrote Nixon's story. And I'm sure he was Meriwether Lewis when he wrote the Lewis and Clark expedition. And he's written 2 or 3 books, and if you notice, the toll it takes on a man is that he had to write those books. It was like a rule, because his system was loaded with it. Here he's got all these stories from all these people, and you've got to unload, okay? These are my own insights anyway, so I don't know whether you enjoy them or not, but that's what's real life about writing a book. As far as the things in there, the little bit I had, I put in. The here and there, I told a few other stories. David Webster. David Webster was a great swimmer. And we were down in Austria, and there was a lake down there, and he asked McBride, Honest John McBride from New Jersey, and he asked Honest John if he'd get me, and the 2 of us would go out with the boat while he swam across this lake. Well, the boat was leaking. I ended up with a little butt can, emptying the boat. John was rowing, and Dave was swimming. And on the way back, the wind started up, and Webster made it. But I was really, John was really rowing, and I was really bailing, and Dave was really swimming. I mean, that story isn't in there, but I wish it had been for Webster's sake. I like that better than Webster's own book, where he kind of complained that, well, we don't get a shot at some of the stuff. Well, and Webster was an unusual person. He gets a good play in the book because Ambrose liked him. But Ambrose was a little snobby in that because he liked him because he went to Yale. And he liked the other one, he went to Harvard. Well, when you get all of this together, Dave Webster was there on his own, but Dave was very much of an individual. And eventually what happened to him is I think he got eaten by the shark. When he started, he wrote a wonderful book about sharks that when Jaws showed, everybody ran to find some book about sharks. And Dave had it in a very authoritative book. I got it from the Baltimore Library. And but he went out near Catalina, and they found his boat that went with a chunk out of the gunnel and only 1 oar. And he liked to go out among the sharks. So I think that's the way Dave went. I mean, You hate to think of it even, get eaten by a shark. Or George was just died, heavy equipment fell out. Imagine going through all of this thing, and you're 72 or 73 years old, and a piece of heavy equipment falls on you and squash you like a bug, okay? And that's how George was. And it is too bad, really. And any number of guys. I think the story they tell about Talbot is a very good story. How he went up in the woods. He never really got over the wall. There were a few like that. There were what I call, they were like mountain men, like Jeremiah Johnson, in their attitude towards them. And not many of us could go up and live in the woods. We think we could, but I think we can't do that. But anyway, are there any questions? Or if I tired you all out? Worn out?
But, well, I think we've got a tired bunch of kids here today. They were pretty busy.
Well, they were a good bunch. I enjoyed the group. I hope that what I've given you here, was it worth anything to you? Yeah. I can remember one time when I was up at the university, just starting out, they had a New Zealand officer come through, and they wanted to have a talk in front of everybody. And someone jumped up and started taking pictures of him with cameras, and the man almost fell off the stage. I mean, he was really shy, but he was a fighter pilot, and he was a good one. And even back then, oh boy, we were so happy to see this fighter pilot. And then he passed around his, I forget. He passed around this Burmese knife that he had. It was the Gurkhas. The Gurkhas had this special knife. And it had a little place where there was a notch in it for the blood to drip out. Oh boy, we were handling that knife. We were in 7th heaven. Well, we were kids. The wars are like that, but they're not good things. Wars aren't good things. Wars are last resort. And I always think of Edmund Burke when he was over there in the English house. And he wasn't a good speaker, but they would record the speech. And he said, we should get to be conciliated with the common, because conciliation failing, force remains. But force failing, nothing remains. And there's a lot to be said for that. I don't mean that we should be pacifists. You have to fight certain times. But if you can negotiate your way and look at some of these problems that are out there and not just let them fester and come up and everything, and tackle them, okay? And then realize your limitations. I don't think we can take on the whole world, everything as much as we like to. I think it's good to have good feeling towards everybody, but I don't think we're going to solve everything here. I mean, you have to work at it, but you can add a little bit to it, and then hope the next guy is picking up where you belong. And I see you kids all out there in Lancaster. I'll just say one last thing. I spent 6 years in Lancaster. I lived up there. On Harley Street, if anyone knows where that is, but it's on the west side of town. We had a beautiful little...
What was the name of the street, Pat?
Harless, Harlas.
You know what that is?
And
Yeah?
we had a beautiful little Italian restaurant over there. That was the name, it was like Benito's or something. There was a family name. And they moved in Shakey's. I said, here they had a gem of a thing, and they put in this dumpy Shakey's. And Shakey's wasn't anything at all like the Italian food you could get there. Bertano's, that was it, Bertano. And poor old Bertano was knocked out of business by Shakey's. And I said, that was progress. So we don't need that kind of progress. And I met Norman Neisky, that is in the book in my spot. And he said, oh, Pat, you would have liked it. We went back to Austria. And he said, and we went to Zellersee. telling them, see, it was this beautiful resort town along the lake. You couldn't help but love the place. And there was no food there, but the restaurants had been there. You know, and if you could get to the end of the war, you could get back to normal. And he said, guess where we ate? And I said, that beautiful hotel where we were in on the track meet? He said, no. I said, some of those nice hotels that line the lake, you know, the restaurants down there. There was no food when we were there. And he said, no. I said, where was it? He said, McDonald's. I said, you mean they ruined my beautiful place? He said, well, I'm saying, I said, I've always kept a nice picture of that in my mind as to how it would be in peacetime, and that's the best they could do with it, throw McDonald's in there for food. And this is in Austria, where Austria, Bavaria, and Germany, where you could get the best of food that McDonald's would have to offer, hamburgers and schnitzel, wiener, and whatever you need, you know. But anyway, we don't need McDonald's to make the difference. We got to do better than that. Okay, I give up. All right, yes.
I just wanted to know, is your picture on the book?
Is that picture?
Is your picture
Are
there?
you in the picture?
Oh, no. That picture there is some of the real core of the band of brothers. Those men are the ones that started. In the background, there's some infantry people there. They're not from the air in the back of that picture. There's 3 or 4 of them. But the ones up front are mainly from, I think, the 3rd platoon. I recognize a little supply sergeant at the end.
Force two, one of them, Talbert.
Yes, Talbert's in there. He ended up as first sergeant. And Gus was there.
That's good.
On this sector. He ended up as an industrial arts teacher. Talbot ended up as a mountain.
C.T. Smith, Morris.
He had taught for him, oh, and Bob Rader, who was my assistant's father, Bob was a teacher in Pismo Beach. Right up there in California. Yeah.
Do you remember exactly where you were when you heard of the German surrender? Germany's surrender. Where were you? What were you doing?
Okay. It came through in little patches. On the 5th of May, we were down in Bavaria, and we were just coming into Berchtesgaden, and there was like a rumor, hey, the thing is almost over. It was that type of thing. Then we heard that it was over on the 7th, and then there was a delay on that was pulled off of that. But what had happened really in real life was that the Americans figured it was over on the 7th, and the Russians said, wait a day so they could declare it over. So that's what happened, and we ended up on the 8th. But we were in Berchtesgaden at that time. Berchtesgaden was a little village. The Eagle's Roost is like a top of a big home, and it looks off into Austria. But on the other side of the railroad track, up in the hills, is the British Berchtesgaden. Beautiful little village. Typical of the Bavarian village.
You go up there to the top, Hitler? Do you
No,
go up
I
there?
never got up there. I think the only one that might have got up there is Dick Winters. I think he might have got up there first day. And, no, I was lucky to get as far as I did there. If I hadn't gone out in the morning of the last day, what I did is I just felt like doing something different. I felt like having some eggs for breakfast, and I got Walker from Missouri and said, Harry, let's go. And we'll see if we can find some eggs. And so we went down through the woods. And as we were walking along, came to a building. If the building were here, it's like one of those buildings where you might have put in a tractor or something into the building. But a nice outlying building. It wasn't a farmhouse like it says. It was a building. But they had a big door on it. But there was smoke coming out of the chimney, and I said, see if we don't want to go past this thing.
find out that, what looks like it's getting close to the end of the war, we're gonna be dead, we'd be shot for being careless. So I said, well, follow me, Harry, and I kicked the door in. And that's when I came across these two guys, and I took them to the Italian deserters. And I stared at them. They had a big smoke can hanging from the ceiling, and they had a little table there, and they had a bottle on the table. Well, one of them, because he knew we couldn't communicate, he reached out and grabbed the bottle and put it in my face and said something that sounded like Pax to me, peace. And I said, okay, peace, And, well, they weren't armed, and then I asked them where they got the bottle, and they said, over there. On the top of the mountain was the picture I got. Well, I took the bottle. I didn't drink really at the time. As we walked back, so we got the eggs, and I followed up on the eggs because when I went to one of the eggs, they're very cautious. We don't know if everyone will say, well, we're going to have a drink of wine. You're thinking it over. Should you do this or not? So I said, no. And he said, okay, I'll bring it out. So he brought it out, and we toasted at the end of the war. And I felt it was, it reminded me when I was a kid, and someone was going back to Ireland, but they'd come by the house, and we don't. But it reminded me, you gotta keep your humanity. You get mad at, say, the Japanese, and the next thing you know, the Japanese are French. You get mad at the Germans, and next thing you know, the Germans are French. In this country here, we've got all types of people here, and they're all part of the population. So we shouldn't be too anxious to start picking out people we don't like and say, that's an enemy for life, for generations. We did that a little bit with the Germans.